Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining this week 2 of the CBT Skills Group for Anxiety. And if you haven't seen group week 1, rather, I'd suggest you look on my YouTube channel and watch that because it's a precursor for what we're going to be discussing in today's session. So that's week 1, an introduction to CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, skills for anxiety. And that kind of gives some description for the outlining of the course, these weekly live streamed sessions, and it sets the scene for what we're going to be discussing in today's session. So a quick reminder for you to have a look at that one on my YouTube channel. Please do subscribe to my channel if you could. There are always going to be lots of free videos, free talks like this, free groups, and all sorts of other freebies as well on my YouTube channel. At the moment, these CBT skills sessions are taking place on Sunday evenings at 7 p.m. UK time. That's 7 p.m. GMT. And it tends to last for about 45 minutes maximum to an hour. Okay. Everybody's welcome all over the world. The more the merrier. And please feel free to enter any questions or comments into the chat bar down on your right hand corner of your screen, and any questions I'll be happy to try and answer them as we go through the course or towards the end of today's session. Okay, thank you very much. In terms of last week, a very quick recap. We looked at what is cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, I'm going to call it most of the time. It's kind of therapy that looks at how we think about situations and how we behave in situations. And basically, the therapist will help you to explore perhaps more helpful, realistic, compassionate, and constructive alternatives to how we're thinking about a situation and how we behave as well, in order to help to alleviate psychological distress, such as anxiety that we're looking at today in these sessions. Okay, what we covered in last week's session, if you remember, was we briefly looked at the link between how we think and how we feel. Okay, and I gave several examples. First example was imagine that you're asleep in bed and you hear a bang in your house, perhaps downstairs. Automatically, the mind perhaps will think some negative automatic thought, some catastrophic thought, such as there's a burglar in the house, maybe I'm going to get killed, maybe it's somebody firing a gun outside, maybe there's some criminal in the house, maybe something bad's going to happen, etc., etc. And we kind of looked at how that automatic thought would, of course, create a whole load of anxiety for us. Okay. But remember, the key point is that it was an automatic thought. It came into our head as soon as we woke up and we heard the bang. We don't yet have any evidence as to what caused the bang downstairs in our house. Okay. But we have assumed the worst. Okay. Therefore, we've helped to create anxiety for ourselves. Okay. We'd feel anxious, worried, and frightened. So in today's session, we're going to look at some of the thinking errors that we make, and all of us make thinking errors. Thinking errors are central to CBT, and really they relate to not to an incorrect or a wrong way of thinking, even though we call them thinking errors. They're more akin to, logical errors, inconsistencies in the way that we think in certain situations. These will become clearer in a few moments. Okay, so I don't want to leave you with the idea that there are right and wrong ways to think about stuff, because there aren't. Okay, there are helpful, constructive, compassionate, realistic, and kind ways of thinking about situations, kind to ourselves. And there are, of course, unhelpful ways that are not constructive in situations, ways of thinking. Okay, so thinking automatically that there's a burglar in the house because we've heard a bang in the night is obviously not helpful. Okay. It's based on very little evidence at all. It makes us feel anxious. It doesn't help us to feel good about that situation. Doesn't make us want to explore and find out what's the cause of that bang. Okay. So thinking errors, we all make them. I make them myself as well. And with the key skills in CBT, what we're aiming to do is to explore the way we think about situations. Okay. Identify some of the thinking errors that we're making. Then we want to correct those errors. Okay. Replace the unhelpful thoughts with more realistic, more helpful, more evidence-based thoughts, thoughts that are more compassionate to ourselves, thoughts where we're being more kind to ourselves, and thoughts that don't lead us into feeling some form of psychological distress. Okay. So I'm going to go through some of the thinking errors today. There's a whole load of them, but I'm probably going to cover maybe about 12 of them, the 12 main thinking errors. Okay. I would recommend that if you get in touch with me, I'll send you a free copy of my one of my books, which is Introduction to CBT. Okay. Or also the Little Book of Thinking Errors. Okay. It's an excellent little book. I can send it to you in PDF format. And in that, there's a whole load of thinking errors and descriptions of each one. Okay. Very helpful. Happy to send it to you free of charge. Okay. Let's go through some of the thinking errors then. And as we do go through them, make a note of each one. And perhaps during today's talk or afterwards, sit and think about some of the situations where you feel anxious. Okay. And try and identify some of the errors that you might be making, some of the thinking errors. Okay. Now, the first one, catastrophizing. Okay. Assuming the worst. An example of that is what we talked about in session one, where, for example, you're asleep in bed, you hear a bang downstairs, you automatically think it's a burglar. Okay. So automatically we're assuming the very worst case scenario. Okay. We're catastrophizing in CBT kind of language. Now, the idea here is when we find ourselves catastrophizing, is to do the opposite, to decatastrophize. Okay. Try and find evidence about the situation. More often than not, you will find that it's not half as bad as it seems. Okay. So we can do the research. We have to decatastrophize. Okay. Take out the catastrophic thinking and bring it down several notches. Okay. And you'll notice that we'll feel better as a result. Won't feel half as anxious if we feel anxious at all. Okay. The idea also is, if you remember last week, we talked about in CBT, we often keep ABC sheets where I hope you can see this on the camera. It might look back to front, but here we keep a record. We start to keep a record of situations where we felt some anxiety. Okay. And so here in the A column, we write down what happened. Okay. Here in the B column is where we describe the thoughts and beliefs that went through our mind when that thing happened, during or immediately afterwards. Okay. And here we describe how we felt as a result. And remember, the key thing in CBT is that it's not what happens that causes us to feel the way that we feel, but rather it's how we interpret what happens, how we think about what happens. That's what causes the distress, the anxiety, the sadness, the depression, the worry, the anger, for example. Okay. So with these thinking errors that we're going to look at in a short while, what I would recommend you do during the week ahead, perhaps, keep a record of some situations where you felt anxious and just spend time investigating those situations. Break them down into small pieces. what happened, thoughts that went through your mind, and the feelings that you had. Okay. And with the thinking errors, once you get used to the thinking errors and you understand exactly what they are, after a while, you can start looking at the different thoughts that you have in situations where you feel anxious. And with practice, you'll be able to pick out some of those examples where you have made one of the thinking errors. Okay. Maybe you catastrophize sometimes. I know that I do. Okay. I have the skills now to quickly turn it around and to stop myself from decatastrophizing, but it still happens. I still stop myself from catastrophizing, not stop myself from decatastrophizing, just to be clear. So I still do that sometimes. I have that thinking error going on from time to time. Something happens and I assume the worst. And then I feel some anxiety as a result. But I'm able to quickly turn it around and say, well, hang on, maybe this is not as bad as it appears. Where's the evidence that this is a catastrophe? Okay. Another way of thinking about catastrophizing is awfulizing. Okay. When we say to ourselves, oh, this is absolutely awful that this has happened. Okay. More often than not, it's not awful. It might be challenging. It might be a difficult situation. It might be a good learning opportunity for us to learn some coping strategies and skills. Okay. So decatastrophizing, bringing it down several notches. Okay. Next thinking error, predicting the future negatively. Many of us do this. I know I do it myself as well. Okay. And just to be clear, because I'm a psychologist and a forensic mental health expert witness, and I'm a CBT therapist, I'm not immune from thinking errors. I make them myself on a frequent basis. The idea is that I'm able to quickly turn it around, turn the situation around before that thinking error takes root and begins to create some negative emotions. Okay. And with practice, you'll be able to do that as well. Okay. Predicting the future negatively then. Imagine you have a job interview next week, Tuesday. Okay. And already you're thinking, I'm not likely to get that job. The interviewer won't like me. I won't be able to answer all of the questions clearly. The interviewer will see that I'm nervous, etc., etc. The interview is going to go bad. I won't get the job, and then I'll feel dreadful as a result. Okay. There's a touch of catastrophizing there, as you can see, but also I'm predicting the future negatively. Future hasn't happened yet, remember. Okay. I have no way of knowing how the job interview will go next week, Tuesday. I can plan and prepare. I can do my best to make sure that I know all about this company and that I rehearse the kind of questions that I think the interviewer is going to ask me. And I can do my best in that regard. But there's no way that I can know exactly how the interview is going to go next week. Okay. I can't predict the future, negatively or otherwise. I don't have a crystal ball. And even if it did, even if I did, I still wouldn't be able to predict the future. Okay. So give up trying to predict the future. That's how we turn that thinking error around. When we spot that, we say to ourselves, hang on, here's where I'm predicting the future negatively, and the future can't be predicted. Let me plan and prepare and do my best, and let me deal with the future as and when it comes. Okay. Deal with the interview next week, Tuesday. Okay. Deal with the date that I have next week, Tuesday, and see how it goes. Okay. So predicting the future negatively. Trying to mind read. Okay. Many of us do this one. I may have mentioned an example last week where we're walking along the street and we shout good morning to a friend that we notice on the other side of the street. And that friend doesn't acknowledge us. Okay. Doesn't shout hello, doesn't shout good morning, and continues walking in the opposite direction. Okay. Now, there could be a whole range of reasons for that. He, she might be really busy. They might be rushed. They could be in their own mind. They could be worried about something. They could have hearing problems in the one ear that we don't know about. Could be a range of reasons why they didn't respond to us and say good morning. Okay. But if we make the thinking error of mind reading, we attempt to read that person's mind and we say, Peter hasn't said good morning to me. He must be mad at me. He must be thinking this, and this about me. He doesn't like me. He's annoyed that I said this. So he didn't like that I did this, whatever the case may be. That's where we're trying to mind read. And again, put your crystal ball away because we can't read people's minds. Even psychologists and psychiatrists, the best ones in the world, can't read people's minds. Nobody can. Okay. When we try and read people's minds in situations like that I've mentioned, oftentimes we read them in a negative sense, and we assume that person is thinking bad stuff about us. Okay. Similarly, if we're giving a presentation in a classroom or at work in front of colleagues, okay, if we're feeling nervous beforehand, we might start mind reading and thinking, the audience don't like me. They don't like my presentation skills. They think that I'm not very good at my job, etc., etc. Okay, we're reading their minds, and we have to stop ourselves when we find that thinking error. If we're making that thinking error, we have to turn that around and remind ourselves that we can't read people's minds. Okay, and we wait for people's feedback. We wait for Peter, for example, if we see him tomorrow at work, and we'll ask him, is everything okay? Because I shouted hello, good morning the other day, and you didn't seem to hear me. And so then we'll base our thoughts and feelings on the evidence, okay, rather than mind reading. Okay. Catastrophizing, we've mentioned that one already. That's the example, the thinking that a burglar is in the house. Okay. Catastrophizing, awfulizing, assuming the very worst has happened, is going to happen. Okay. That obviously creates a whole load of anxiety for us. So again, we have to decatastrophize and we have to de-awfulize. Call it challenging, call it difficult, calling a learning opportunity, but try not to call something absolutely catastrophic, awful, terrible, worst that it's ever been. Okay. Okay. Demanding perfection of myself or others. Perfection is a wonderful thing. And of course, it's good for all of us in our work, in our private life, in our relationships, our friendships, in our hobbies. It's good for us to pursue perfection, or aim for perfection. But we have to remind ourselves that we're never going to achieve it. There is no such thing as the perfect painting, the perfect husband, the perfect auntie, the perfect banoffee pie, the perfect cup of tea. It doesn't exist. Everything and everyone can be improved. Okay? So when we demand perfection of ourselves, we create a treadmill. We create anxiety for ourselves because we say, okay, when I do this job at work, this specific job, it has to be absolutely perfect. Okay. And you can imagine how that would make us feel anxious. Rather, we would say to ourselves, okay, with this job, this specific job at work, I know that it's an important job and it's important that I do my very best, and I will do my very best. Okay. Take away the perfection out of it. Don't use that word. Okay. It's one of the drivers of anxiety. When we demand perfection of ourselves, we tell ourselves that this has to be perfect. Okay. If I'm appearing on Britain's Got Talent or America's Got Talent. Not, I don't think I ever will, but who knows? Mustn't predict the future negatively. Imagine I'm a contestant on one of those shows, and I say to myself, okay, I have to sing the perfect song, the very best ever. There is no room for faults. It has to be absolutely perfect. You can imagine then going on stage and feeling really, really anxious about it, rather than just assuring myself that I'm going to do my very best. Okay. And my best is good enough. Remember, your best is always good enough in any field. If it's genuinely your best and you put all the effort into it that you can, and you've used all the skills and talents that you have in doing something, that is your best, is your best, is your best. Okay. Really important. Okay. How about what ifs? That sounds like a strange thinking error, doesn't it? But we often use what ifs. Okay. What if it rains tomorrow and I've got that barbecue with all these people coming to my home? What if there's a transport strike tomorrow and I can't get to that really important job interview? Okay. What if my husband leaves me? What if my wife leaves me? What if I get sick? What if I have cancer? What if I lose my purse on the subway? Okay. The list can be endless with what ifs. And again, it's one of the drivers of anxiety. Okay. And if you made a note of all the situations where you said, where you worried to yourself, what if X, Y, and Z happens? Okay. If you kept a record of that, I guarantee at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, 99 times out of 100, the things that you feared happening, the what ifs, would never come true. Okay. It never happens. It very, very, very rarely happens. And if the what if does come true, then we deal with that in the best way that we can. Okay. And we amend our thoughts in that difficult situation so that they are as helpful as can be for us, constructive, realistic, compassionate, and kind to us. Okay. So remember, the what ifs, it's a little bit related to awfulizing, because when we say what if, it tends to be something negative or anxiety provoking that we're imagining. Okay. When you pinpoint that thinking error, what ifs, try and turn it around and replace it with what then? Okay. Okay. So what if there's a transport strike tomorrow and I can't get to that important job interview? Okay. What then? Okay, well, what then? What would I do? I would call the employers in advance with as much notice as I can and say, I'm really, really sorry. You may have heard there's a national transport strike and I can't get to that interview tomorrow. Would you mind if we rescheduled it, please? Okay. Most employers will be totally understanding and say, yes, okay, we'll reschedule for another day. Okay. And if the employer doesn't want to reschedule and they say, no, you've missed your chance, that was it, I'm not going to reschedule the interview, well, then it's not the kind of employer that you would want to work for and share your skills and knowledge and expertise with. Okay. That's what ifs. Okay. Underestimating our ability to cope. This is quite a common one in challenging situations, and let's be honest with ourselves. Difficult stuff happens. Okay. Challenging situations arise that can be difficult to deal with. Okay. If we underestimate our ability to cope, what we're doing is we're playing down our skills. We're talking ourselves down. Okay. And we say things like, oh, I would never be able to cope with this, or I can't handle this, I can't deal with this, I can't manage. Okay. I don't know what I would do in that situation. I would go to pieces. Okay. We're underestimating our ability to cope. Okay. If you see yourself making that thinking error, turn that around and say, I will do my very best to manage in this difficult situation. It is difficult. I don't have to cope alone. I can ask for the assistance, for the advice of other people, other organizations, for example. Okay. Family members, loved ones, and friends can also help me to cope, perhaps, if I need that help. Okay. So don't underestimate your ability to cope. You'd be amazed at all the different things that you have coped with in your life. Even going to school when you were 4 or 5 years old felt like a massive, I can only speak for myself. It was a very kind of anxiety provoking time. Those first few days going to a new school, and I'm 4 or 5 years old, didn't think I would manage it. But within a week or two, hey presto, I was having the time of my life and I really, really enjoyed it. Okay. Now, the thing is, throughout our life, we make lots of estimations of difficult situations and we underestimate our ability to cope. But if we look back over our life over the longer term, most of us will see, or all of us will see, I think, that we have all coped with difficult, challenging situations at various points in our life. Okay. And we became stronger and wiser as a result. And we've carried those key skills forward to help us in future situations as well. Okay. Overestimating the dangers. This is a little bit like awfulizing and catastrophizing. An example might be if we're nervous about going on a bus, okay, and we overestimate the dangers. So, on most buses in most towns in the UK and perhaps in the US as well, it's very unlikely that we'll be the victim of violence on a bus. Okay. There are lots of other people around. There are cameras on the bus driver's there. He has access to his radio. On the whole, we're pretty safe on public transport, on buses. Okay. If we overestimate the dangers, we might say, I'm not going to go on the bus because I'm bound to be robbed or I could be assaulted or attacked. Okay. Now, once in a very great while, these things do happen, of course, okay, but they're very, very rare, okay. On the whole, traveling by bus is very, very safe, okay. So we have to be sure that we don't underestimate our ability to cope, and we mustn't overestimate the dangers in different situations, okay. Okay. How about thinking in black and white? Okay, that's another one of the thinking errors. It's also called all or nothing. Okay, so either I'm going to be brilliant at the job interview tomorrow or I'll be absolutely awful. It's one or the other. That's black and white thinking. Whereas in reality, there are lots of gray areas. Okay. There are lots of points in between absolutely brilliant, absolutely awful. Most of us will fall at some point in between those two polar opposites. Okay. The meal that I prepare this evening will either be absolutely beautiful or absolutely dreadful. Okay. Now, again, it can't be just one or the other like this. There are lots of gray areas in between. Okay. The meal could be good. It could be very good. It could be excellent. It could be in need of improvement, for example, if you're anything like me with cooking. But we have to be careful not to think in black and white and just assume that there's only two options here. Very, very good, very, very bad, and there's no in between. Okay. Black and white thinking. Okay. Overgeneralizing. This is where we it's a bit like prejudice, really. We generalize in situations in a very negative kind of way, and we assume that all situations of a similar kind will be similar in nature, or all people of a similar kind will be similar in nature. So, for example, if we have negative experience in a relationship, okay, and that relationship comes to an end, if we overgeneralize, we'll say to ourselves, I'm not getting into another relationship. All men are bad. All men are cheaters. All men are womanizers, for example, or all women are no good. They're unfaithful. They're crafty. All sorts of negative things. And we're generalizing from our one experience, perhaps. And we're generalizing to, all the people in the world. Okay. Remember, there are so many billions of people in the world. They can't all have the same characteristics. Okay. There are some good people. There's some bad people. There are some people at various points in between. Okay. So overgeneralizing, we're generalizing to an extreme. Okay. I had one bad experience at a job interview 4 years ago, and I will never go to another job interview because that is bound to happen again. All interviews are the same. They're very, very stressful, and I can't cope with them. Okay. So overgeneralizing. When you find yourself making that thinking error, overgeneralizing, just remind yourself that actually it's not factually correct, it's not accurate, and it's not reliable. It's not realistic for us to assume the same set of characteristics for all situations or all kinds of people. It just can't be done. Different situations are different. Okay. In terms of the thinking in black and white, I should have said that when you're making that thinking error, try and remind yourself that there are lots of gray areas in between in every different situation. Okay. So there's never ever just two possible definitions of a situation. Okay. So that's most of the thinking areas that I'm going to talk about today. So what I would recommend is ask any questions you would like. Please do send them to me through the channel. You can email me. My email address, I think, is on the channel somewhere. You can leave me a message through this YouTube channel. Anyway, my email address is kmodoherty@hotmail.com. And I'd be happy to try and answer any questions that you send to me. Okay. What I would recommend in terms of these thinking errors then, you can print off one of these ABC sheets. You'll find them on the internet. Just type in ABC sheet for CBT, and you'll find a whole load of sheets that are similar to this, or you can make your own one. So I'd recommend then during the weeks ahead, in the A column here, write down something that happened, one of the situations where you felt anxious. Here, write down the thoughts that went through your mind during that situation or immediately afterwards. And here, describe how you felt: anxious, tense, worried, upset, angry, for example. Now, here's the key. Do this for several days. Keep one row for each day. Okay. So keep this record for several days. And after several days, have a look at some of the thoughts that go through your mind during the past several days. And you'll often find that there's a pattern, that there are some similar thoughts that keep on coming up time and time again, and you keep on feeling anxious in certain situations. Okay. And then what you do is, once you see the pattern in the thinking, the thoughts here, using the stuff that we've covered today, try and identify what thinking errors have you been making in the past several days? Okay. And then do your very best to follow the guidance that we've discussed in this session this evening to change those thinking errors. Okay. Turn them around and write the alternative ways of thinking about that situation. Remember, we're always looking for thinking in helpful, constructive, realistic, compassionate, and kind ways of thinking. Okay. And we're always asking ourselves, is this way of thinking helping me to feel the way that I would prefer to feel? Okay. Is this way of thinking helping me to get to where I want to be or to achieve what I want to achieve? Is this way of thinking helpful? Is it constructive? Am I thinking in a way that is compassionate and respectful towards myself? Okay. Ask yourself those key questions. And if not, if the way that you're thinking isn't kind, helpful, compassionate, for example, and it's not helping you to achieve what you want to achieve, and it's not helping you to get to where you want to be, well, then it's very best time to start looking for alternatives and to turn that around. Okay. Any help at all, if I can be of any help or assistance, please do email me. Please do subscribe to the channel. Send the link to everybody you know, and the more the merrier. And I hope to see you again soon. And keep in touch. Okay. Have a very nice evening. Bye-bye from London, England. Bye-bye.